Hello, everyone, and welcome to Live with Oski After Hours. I will first start with saying that I'm still recovering from being sick for about a week or so now, so please bear with me as I try my best to get through this segment. We do have a great show for you, so do not fret. With that being said, today's segment, we're going to be discussing both B.F. Skinner's and Daniel Bandura's behavior theories and the concept of free will and whether or not they both believed in it. Also, today we have our a guest star who is a good friend of mine. Her name is Whitney Danielle Coleman. She is a life coach extraordinaire, and she is joining us today to discuss the relationship between the media, like TV shows, movies, and games, and behavior, whether or not they correlate or if they affect each other in some way or shape or form. Anyway, with that being said, let's move on to today's segment. So, what exactly is free will, if you ask, and what does it have to do with behavior? Um, well, let me tell you in my opinion, what free will is. To me, free will is the idea that we are able to have some choice in how we, as individuals, act, how we live, what we do, what we say. And it kind of assumes that we are free to choose our behavior. So, in theory, free will states that we are self determined. So, that kind of ties in with the theories of behavior from B.F. Skinner and Daniel Bandura. So you see the connection there so far? Okay. Well, being that I'm still recovering, I am trying not to speak as much as I can, and I didn't want to sit here and make this a dialogue and boring for you, my fans. So I have created two video clips explaining B.F. Skinner's theories and also Daniel Bandura's theories, and kind of determining whether or not they believed in free will. So let's move right along and start playing the first clip, which will be B.F. Skinner's theories and his views on free will. And after that, we'll have a little discussion on it. Okay? Welcome, everyone, to today's first segment. This segment will be discussing Skinner's behavior theory and free will. Skinner was a strong believer that psychology is the science of behavior, and by that he meant all behaviors and not just the personality aspects of it. In fact, he actually did not pay any attention to the internal aspects of a person to explain their behavior. He focused more on the external actions of that person. He actually was a stern believer that psychologists should stick to the facts. So what they can see, touch, evaluate, manipulate, and study. His focus was on two types of behaviors: respondent behavior and operant behaviors, which we'll discuss in the next coming slides. Before we move on to his behaviors, you need to understand that he believed in determinism, which is defined as factors being outside the individual, a position known as environmental determinism. Wait, what the hell is environmental determinism? Well, let me tell you. Look at it this way. It is believed that with determinism, it is believed that if a child grows up within an abusive household or abusive parents, they will grow up to become abusive parents as well. In other words, their behavior is conditioned by their environment, therefore environmental determinism. Boom, mind blown, right? Respondent behavior are responses made to or elicited by a specific environmental stimuli, and it also relies on reinforcement and extinction. So basically, think of respondent behavior just as the image shows here on your right. When the doctor bangs your knee jerks in reaction. Hopefully it does not jerk and kick him in the face as it shows in the picture. Another example would be when you touch a hot surface, you immediately move your hand because you know that it hurts. Therefore, you're responding to the burning stimuli. Does that make sense? I hope so. Now, looking at reinforcement, reinforcement is the act of strengthening a response by adding a reward, thus increasing the likelihood of that response being repeated. So basically that means, let's take a puppy for example again. When you're training the puppy to sit, every time you say the command sit and he does it and you give him a treat and you continue to do so every time you say sit and he does it, he is going to grow to expect a treat every time he hears the word sit, and then therefore he's going to sit every single time. Extinction is quite the opposite of that. Extinction is the process of eliminating a behavior by withholding reinforcements. So with the whole example of telling a dog to sit with treats, think of it this way: when you tell the dog to sit, you slowly start taking away the treats to the point where when he is told to sit, there's no reward, therefore he's not going to do it anymore. And I think that this picture again makes a good example of what extinction is. Moving right along, we're going to discuss operant behavior, which is actually a behavior that is emitted spontaneously or voluntarily that operates on the environment to change it. Skinner believed that this behavior was the most important out of the two. He looked at it as human behavior was not really, he looked at it as human behavior being spontaneous and cannot really be traced to a specific stimulus, meaning that that behavior was emitted rather than elicited by that stimulus. So with that being said, that was acting in a way that was voluntary and not involuntary. So he saw that as that condition, as that behavior or reaction being conditioned. With operant conditioning, Skinner looked at it as a procedure by which change in the consequences of a response will affect the rate at which a response occurs. And that is very important to understand because that's where you see his views on free will. Basically, again, going back to the puppy example, if you train the puppy to press a button which releases a treat, once he makes that connection that you press the button, the treat comes out, he's going to press the button every time he wants a treat. And again, here's a little image that can explain it as well. Moving on, does Skinner believe in free will? Skinner believed that the concepts such like free will and motivation were to be dismissed as illusions that disguise the real causes of human behavior. Sorry, I forgot to type that in there. He was actually quoted as saying, "Operant conditioning shapes behavior as a sculptor shapes a lump of clay." So if you put all that together, you can easily conclude that Skinner was not a believer of free will. Do you believe in free will? Thank you. Well, this ends our first segment. Now back to you, Oscar. Well, and there you have B.F. Skinner's views on behavior and on free will. To be quite honest, I kept going back and forth when I was doing my research for this, and I at first thought he was for free will and not against free will, but I really did like how he approached this, and now I hope that you guys did learn something from that clip. Moving along, we will now see a different perspective from Daniel Bandura. And one thing I do notice from them is that they really did not have much in common when it comes to their theories and their beliefs, but from what I gathered in the research, they actually respected each other. So let's take a look at what Daniel Bandura's theories of behavior are and what his views on free will are. So hopefully this clip will be insightful as well. So here, without further ado, is the clip for Bandura. Hi everyone. For this segment, we're going to be discussing Daniel Bandura's behavior theory and his views on free will. When it comes to comparing Bandura and Skinner, the only thing they really had in common was that they agreed behavior is learned, and they basically disagreed with everything else. He had two approaches. One of them was known as the social learning theory, which focused on behavior, how it's learned, and how it is changed or modified in a social context. The other one is called the observational learning, which we'll discuss more details as we go by. You can see here, your left-hand side, this is the basically an image showing you the social learning theory, and over here the observational learning theory. Give you a couple of seconds to look at that. Okay. Moving on. So one of his approaches was observational learning. Observational learning is the process of learning new responses by observing the behavior of other people. This can be done through modeling. And no, it's not being a fashion model and walking down the runway. This is a different type of modeling. So, in other words, it's basically monkey see, monkey do, if that makes sense to you. One way to do this is through vicarious learning. Vicarious learning is the process of learning or strengthening a behavior by observing the behaviors of others and the consequences of that behavior, rather than experiencing the reinforcement or the consequences directly. So basically, if you look at that picture right there, it's a perfect example. You know, the cartoon character is saying, Jane got a new doll for her first rank, I'm going to study hard too, because she saw that her friend got a doll as a reward for, you know, being successful in studying hard. Therefore, she's going to do so as well, even though that did not happen to her. Okay. Modeling is, like I said earlier, was not the fashion model, you know, walk, runway, and all that stuff. This is a different type of modeling. When it comes to this term, it is a behavior modification technique that involves observing the behaviors of others and participating with them in performing the desired behavior. Modeling consists of 4 components. It's attention, retention, reproduction, motivation. And basically, modeling just describes the process of learning new information, skills, and behaviors through watching people. It's like a role model, per se. Like, say, if I see Jada Pinkett walking down the street wearing a white jeans after Labor Day, I'm gonna wear white jeans after Labor Day because I saw her do it, therefore I think it's okay. Don't laugh at that example. Some types of examples of modeling are verbal modeling, which is where someone verbally gives you instructions and have some type of visual. This can be through orientation or videos like that. Disinhibition is the weakening of inhibitions or constraints by observing the behavior of a model. So, for example, let's say you're shy and you don't want to take your shirt off at the beach, but you see everybody else doing it. You don't want to stand out by wearing your shirt, so you lower your inhibitions and you take your shirt off. Trolling is another example, and it's actually kind of like a bad one. Trolling is when you post online comments, basically following what other people write. These are usually negative, vulgar, and hurtful to people. Trolling is actually a good example of disinhibition because you may not feel comfortable posting something about a girl in high school saying that her teeth are disgusting and that she should die because of it. But if you see other popular kids doing it, you follow suit, therefore your inhibitions are lower. And if you look at the chart next to it right here, it kind of explains a little bit better as well. So I'll give you a couple of seconds to look at that over. Moving forward. There are three factors that influence modeling. There are characteristics of the models, characteristics of the observers, reward associated with their behaviors. Models are just like us, but people that we look up to. So if you look at this chart right here, where it says attention, these are the four factors of modeling. So I compared it to what I found in the readings. So one is attention. Paying attention to the model is a condition for learning. So again, you're watching the person that you see as a role model and you want to learn from them. Retention is the process of when you see their actions and you remember their actions, so you can start copying those actions, which leads us to reproduction, which is just that. You're acting the way they did based on your memory. And then the motivation is what you get from it, the award part. Give it a few seconds to look at that. So when it comes down to it, does Bandura believe in free will? Bandura essentially believed that behavior was controlled by the individual through their cognitive processes and by the environment through external situations. He called this reciprocal determinism. What is that exactly? I will tell you. Reciprocal determinism is the idea that behavior is controlled or determined by the individual through cognitive processes and by the environment through external social stimulus events. So when it comes down to it, yes, he did believe in free will. The question is, do you? Thank you. Hey, welcome back. What did you guys think of Daniel Bandura's theories of behavior and his view or conceptualization of free will? I actually thought that it was brilliant how he went about his theories, and so much of leaning more towards his theories than Skinner's theories, which actually leads me to a question that one of the audience members gave me or asked me while the clip was playing. And this audience member basically asked me to describe and discuss my thoughts on free will, as that term is used in psychology. And to be quite honest, I don't think that is an easy question to answer, but I'm going to give it my best. Sorry, I'm trying to just put my glasses on. Okay, so free will, when it comes to being used as a term in psychology, I will have to say that I think it's a debatable term for many in psychology. As clearly you can see in the clips earlier, Skinner thinks that free will is a delusion, while Bandura thinks it's actually real, and basically the oil running the human machine. And I think that free will has a lot to do with psychology. Everyone has had major points where in the past they thought that we were driven by our childhood experiences, that we were conditioned by that, in the sense that if we grew up in a abusive home, we were going to grow up to be abusive parents. I grew up in a kind of abusive house, but the abuse never came towards me. But I grew up seeing it. I did not become an abusive person. I chose to be better. I chose to uh, live my life with love and determination and not anger or violence. So, free will, right? If not, then Skinner's, you know, environmental determinism would have said that I would have grown up to be abusive. So um, that's one example of how I believe free will is key. Another example is, again, leaning towards Daniel Bandura's theories, like of social conditioning, where we do tend to follow um, role models. For example, Chris Evans, let's say Jada Pickett, which I mentioned in one of my clips, um, and any other celebrity. But we see them buying this kind of coffee, so we try to do the same thing. We see coworkers who come in early, put out hard work in, and get rewarded. So we try to do the same thing, and that's our choice. We decide to do that. Um, so again, that's free will being tied in. Um, so I do think that free will should be used more often when discussing psychology. A lot of people tend to shy away from it because you know it can turn into a discussion of um, destiny and religion and whatnot. But I don't think free will is a concept to be shied away from. You should face it and ask questions about it. So I hope that I was able to answer that question properly. If not, please leave me comments and I will do some more research and thinking and get back to you on that. With that being said, we are going to take a short break, and when we get back, we will be discussing the media relationship and correlation to our behaviors with Whitney Danielle Coleman. So stay tuned, and we'll be back after these short messages. Thank you. Welcome back to Life with Oski After Hours. This is now the Let's Talk segment, and here joining us today is Whitney Danielle Coleman, the life coach extraordinaire. Um, Today we're going to be discussing the potential positive or negative influences that the media, such as TV, movies, and video games, has on people's behaviors. As we all know, this is a growing problem nowadays, especially with violent video games being attributed to actual violent crimes. So let's start off with Whitney giving us her opinion on how these video games or media are influencing behavior both positively and negatively. Whitney?
Absolutely. So I think some of the positives are definitely the social skills that a lot of the youth and the adults that play video games get, working with other people on the phone, right? They've got their headphones on, they're able to communicate and really tap into each other's skills virtually. And I think that's a really important skill to have just in life. As far as the negatives go, I feel like a lot of the negatives are the portrayal of different ethnic groups, the violence. It's pretty insane, some of the things that you see in these video games, and it's just not always true. So it's giving that sort of false representation of what's accurate, what's actually happening out in the streets on a daily basis.
Mhm.
So,
So you did bring up a good point about virtual team and networking. And then earlier in this segment, we discussed behavior theories from B.F. Skinner and Daniel Bandura, um, which they disagree on behavior but agree with everything else. And in their theories, they both agree with positive reinforcement, social learning, basically copying our role models and behaviors that they see. I wonder, how does that play now with virtual reality, like with video games and TV, most people don't go out anymore. Kids are not out on the streets like we were growing up. I won't say when because we're not going to age ourselves, but um, does those theories still apply to today's media and technology? What are your thoughts?
They do for sure. I think it's a little bit sad, in my opinion, some of the social skills that we now lack as just a generation going forward. We just text all the time. And so now we've kind of invented the subtext, right, for lack of a better term. And the way that we communicate has changed drastically. And we lose some of that body language that you can only really get in person. When you're texting, when you're messaging and emailing only, people don't even want to talk on the phone anymore. So I think it's definitely shifting the culture, and there are pros and cons to everything, including communication.
Thank you. In my opinion, I think it's a very interesting times that we're living and experiencing right now, as it in terms of psychology and the effects the media have on it. I don't necessarily think that you can correlate a relationship between violent video games to actual violent behavior. One example is the Aurora shooter, which immediately the media was portraying that um, and by all means, I do not condone violence, but they were tying it to violent video games, but it turns out that he was not into violent video games. He was into Minecraft and other things that were not violent. Um, in terms of TV and other media, I believe that it does play in with both Skinner and Bandura's theories in a way that um, the way media portrays female and males nowadays, and the way they try to attract that market by using and advertising sexy media. Uh, as we all know, people, especially youth in particular, like to copycat their role models, and role models usually are celebrities. Celebrities are actors, models, you name it. Instagram people. I don't know how they became famous, but whatever. Um, anyway, um, but when they're being portrayed in a sexy manner, where you see abs, you see curves, you see cleavage, you see back there, and when they're in front covers, they're showing their boobs and being sexualized. And with the social learning behavior theories, what does that tell our youth today? Is it okay for them to copy that, to model that behavior? Um, should we teach our kids to be off of less reliant on media? That's a good question. And that's a question for next week's segment. I hope that this was an informative segment for all of you. And if you have any questions or concerns, please leave them in our comment section. And I look forward to answering those as we get them. Thank you and have a great evening all.
Bye.
Welcome back. For those who are just joining in, um, we just had the wonderful Whitney Danielle Coleman, life coach extraordinaire, sit within our Let's Talk segment, and we discussed the relationship between the media and our behaviors. And I think that was a fascinating discussion. So while on break, I did get another question, and let me tell you guys, you have some pretty good questions. Um, this question is, how would you apply one concept of Skinner's and one concept of Bandura's to change one behavior of your choice? Hmm. Um, I would say that the behavior I would choose to um, change will be increase in exercise, as in going to the gym more often. Um, the concepts that I would tie into this would be positive reinforcement um, and observational learning. Um, how do those two tie in? Well, um, I would use observational learning by hiring a personal trainer so that they can sort of guide me through the workout so I can watch what they do, attain it up here, memorize it, and then um, duplicate the um, actions of my personal trainer because the reward would be to look like my personal trainer, one would hope, right? Um, so um, the one that I would use from Skinner would be positive reinforcement. So by that I mean every time I actually do make it to the gym and make it to my personal training sessions, I would reward myself with something afterwards. Um, and only if I increased my exercise levels from the last session. And by rewards, I mean something that I want, not necessarily like a dessert or anything, because that would be kind of productive to working out, right? But um, it would be like, oh, if I want to buy that new album on iTunes, I'm going to do it because I worked out and I met some new goals today, or I actually want to try that new coffee flavor that came out. Go for it. That kind of uh, positive reinforcement. I hope that answered your question um, the way you wanted me to answer it. But that's all the time we have for today, folks. So thank you for tuning in to this segment of Life of Oski After Hours. I do hope that you guys learned something from it. Um, Again, if there are any other questions or comments, if you want to give back maybe feedback, do so in the comment section. I look forward to hearing from all of you. Take care and see you next week. Mwah.